There, hello. Welcome to the Manitoba School Boards Association webinar, How Does Your Board Measure Up? My name is Janice Arnold, Board Development Consultant here at the Association. Today we're going to take a look at aligning monitoring reports and say that the original air date was February 1st, 2017. Therefore, there isn't the added benefit of live questions, but you can certainly contact our office if you have any further questions or if you're looking for some of the resources that I'll be putting in at the end. With regard to those questions, if you look over on the bottom left side of your screen, you're going to see a pod or a square there that's titled Q&A, and at the bottom there's a scroll bar. You can just type your question in at any time during the webinar. I will, however, address those questions verbally at the end because while you can hear me, I can't actually hear you, and neither can anyone else on the webinar hear you. We do that because I know that we have boards that come in and listen as a group together at their division office, so it just keeps the background noise down. And for the groups, I guess, if you do have a question, you just shout it out to the person that is manning the computer, and we'll look at that at the end. Okay, takes a couple of seconds for those of you that haven't tried this before as I click over to a new screen. I usually like to have a few questions at the beginning so that I can get to know who's actually on here. Nobody else is going to see the results either. If you can just let me know some of this, then sometimes I can frame the questions or the webinar a little bit for the people that are listening in today in any case. So, flip over to the next screen here. You'll see the presentation come up. And just to show you that I am here and not sitting off in some cafe. Hi everybody, sitting here in my office for those of you that have come in to visit me as well. Okay, I'm going to pull up my next screen. Okay, here we go, and you'll see me looking forward from the camera over to the screen. I've got a couple of screens here that'll help me move along in the presentation. So, monitoring, reporting, and policy. The concept is easy enough, so measuring what you've set out to do, but in practice sometimes it's a little more complicated. Today I'll provide some tips on what and how to set up the measures so that they're really meaningful and relevant. And today I'll also be talking about monitoring and reporting aligned with the board policies, as I said. If your board, as I assume most school boards do, has policies around things like quality learning and experiences, achievement, socio-emotional well-being, maybe academic success or student engagement, then I think it's safe to assume that you or your communities would like to see what it says here. We're doing what we said we're going to do. How your board and your division measure up to those policies. Are we doing what we said we were going to do, or are we just doing stuff? I like that phrase are we doing things right, or are we doing the right things? Excuse me. You can do a lot of things right, like you might plan an open house, you might provide snacks for it, you do advertising, you call people to attend, send them out a great notice that explains it all. But if they get there, and the discussion centers around things that were done, I don't know, 10 years ago or something off in another idea, then you really might want to ask, are you doing, or what you were doing, was it the right thing? So doing things right or doing the right thing, big difference there. The starting point is really sound policies. So many of you, I know you've already seen this slide before, or at least are familiar, I guess, with the concepts, but it's really a good place to begin. It shows well the primary focus for school boards. So at the heart of your policies is student learning and achievement. And you'll see that there's a clear link, or seeing that there's a clear link between your policies and that. And it really should be the focus, and it should be evident that that is the focus. As I said, if you take that as your starting point, a sound set of policies that clearly shows the link to student learning, and then you can ensure that your policies are what they should be. But maybe I won't get into the whole how do you create the sound policies. That's a whole other topic. But maybe that's your first broad point when you're looking at aligning policies with monitoring. If you have a sound set of policies, the rest should fall in place, but that's the first point. So if you're confident that your policies, in your policies, and that you have a sound base, then the follow-up is making sure that you're able to monitor the success of those policies. So today I'll go through some ways to ensure that you can do that. Monitoring and reporting should hold a board accountable and demonstrate to stakeholders so that you're doing so, your communities, students, parents, staff, and affiliates, that the board is really, and this division is really fulfilling its role. Reports should then do two things. You monitor compliance with a policy, or you monitor progress on goals set out in policy. So I hope that premise makes sense, because that's the assumption that the rest of this presentation is going to be built upon. Okay, on to some specific things now. I'm going to go into just some headings, so I'll cover off each of these in a moment. So I guess it's the agenda for the webinar, if you like. You're not just looking at it from the top and an overall point of view that we should align policies and monitoring. For alignment of policies and reporting, a good place is to start with a few checks on your current reports, the ones that are actually in place already. So you go through each and answer, does the report show what the policy is asking for? Many of you have likely heard the phrase data-informed decisions or data-driven decisions. This concept is used as a means to align policies and reporting. Firstly, is the data you're counting on sound? Is it, I guess, defensible? The comparison might be a quick posting, on Facebook or something like that, as opposed to a peer-reviewed academic article. What's the data that you're basing everything on? Is it anecdotal, or is it a legitimate survey that clearly shows compliance or progress? Is the source from somewhere that has an ulterior motive? Is it bought? Or is it unbiased? As a board, it's your job to really discern what is acceptable data to back up what you've actually been doing. As a trustee, you might, prior to the report, establish what type of sources or criteria that you're looking for. You'll be telling the people preparing the report, this is what I expect as backup for what you're going to present to us. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to decide on each data source or each piece of data, and you must use this. That would really be, I guess, the job of administration to tap into those data sources that it will use and show that this is sound. So you might want to address, really where are you getting this data from, or if a trustee is not familiar with that source, ask for some information on it. So as a trustee, what you want to do is feel good about the science of the data. What sources are you using for your reports, and the premise that the reporting data is sound. I'll go into that point a little bit more, but I'm just going to run through these next few headings quick. Next, in addition to that, we will be looking at, is the report the information that is just nice to know, or do you need to know it? So what is the information actually going to be used for? Is it an action? Is it a decision? Third, is the report relevant, or does it actually have a purpose? And what is your board looking at in a report, and does it pertain to its work as a board? So first, assess the intention of the policy. Is it compliance, or is it progress? You're taking a listing of your whole current reports. As I said at the beginning, you're going to assess what is coming on your plate at the present, and maybe assess it for, is it a compliance report, or does it show progress? You look to the report to see if it's giving you information in a measurable way. You ask, can I report back to my community with evidence, for example, that the policy is being followed? You feel it and you can show that it actually is doing that. And also, I think very important, is it understandable? Is it presentable in a way to both you and your community that is easy to understand? So for example, if you have a policy around students attaining their high school diploma, you could look to perhaps an absentee report or a report on those who might leave prior to graduation. Or if you have a policy on the board connecting with community, you might look to the number of events and what kind of events. Were they attended and or by how many, and you might look at the content presented. Does the report show that it was information dissemination, or did the report promote the actual engagement of the community? The report in this case might show that you need to maybe make some change in your actions. If you were intending to really have engagement and involvement of your community, but really all you were doing was just telling everybody and there was nothing that came back, then it's a chance to take that report and do something with the policy or do something with the actions coming out of the policy. So you start with a look at the reports and designating their purpose to see if they fit into the category of either compliance or progress. Let's look at compliance. It might look at a policy that has been developed based on the division's beliefs, its vision or mission. If the mission is striving to be, say, the best academically, do you want to look to government reporting, or if you as a division has asked for an increase within the division, so bringing marks up within the divisions, you'll be looking at your own numbers. A report could be related to, say, legislation. For example, I know that there's legislation on community use of schools. You might be looking at, or you might have given directives to your administration and would like a report to show compliance with particular directives. Maybe something that about an emergency response plan that includes practice of protocols that have been set. So compliance reports can sometimes take the form of an audit. You're looking at a checklist of what has been done and to what degree it has been done. How many bus safety drills have you had in a year? Compliance is more about setting standards or baselines and ensuring that those are either met, or if policy is looking to advance that, to exceed them. For progress, boards will be looking to areas like progress on their strategic goals, or possibly individual goals or board goals. This is where accountability to your boards and your public comes in. The board owes its stakeholders answers, and it would be their duty to report on the success of those goals. Here you might assess the frequency of the reporting as well. For example, if you have a 4-year strategic plan, you have reported periodically, or have you reported periodically to your public? So I know I've talked about this with some of my boards that I've talked to, and if you have a provincial government that is in power for 4 years, would you say that it's acceptable to you as a taxpayer if you only hear from that provincial government once in 4 years? Or think about the goals that perhaps your superintendent has set. Would you look at those goals only once in every 4 years? Likely not. So you need to think about reporting back to your electorate and making sure that that is also done in a timely manner. Often you'll have set out in policy, or perhaps you want to think about setting out in policy if it's not already there, how often you want reporting like that to take place. For those reports, most of you are familiar with setting SMART goals, or as you know, they're called specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. If you set up your goals in this manner, it's easy to report the progress to your community on a regular basis. And it should be, you don't have to go through the whole thing of having an open house or maybe paying for a lot of advertising in the local paper. Just updating your strategic plan and writing in there, this is what you've accomplished in the first year or the first 6 months. You might have something in there, if you set goals that might say, we did complete PD training for all our EAs on our reading recovery programs, or no, it was not done within the first 4 months. If you think about setting up your goals in those terms, the SMART way, S-M-A-R-T, then it's very easy to do that reporting, or for you as a board to look and see, are you getting reports that are meaningful like that? Now, once you've assessed your current reports to see if they measure either compliance or progress, in some cases it might be found that they do neither. You may have to then go back to the drawing board and add some detail or criteria. I gave the example of, if you're looking for reporting on your strategic goals, that policy might be you will report to your community once every year or once every 6 months. You're looking for some purpose for within that and your policies. But taking those and reassessing is maybe an option here. If changes are needed, look first to report revision to ensure that it's focused on student learning and achievement. Or you may decide that this particular report isn't even needed. So maybe that's one of your first checkpoints too. But as I was saying, it's one of your first checkpoints. It also leads us into our next check. Let's look on here, and it's need versus want. So at that point, you're saying, do you even need or do you still need the report? Things obviously change, and I don't think that you're going to be receiving a report that was done, 30, 40 years ago. So you're asking about the purpose of the information. When you're assessing a need or want, you say, what is its intention? If you can't articulate that or not to your satisfaction, there's your first indication, obviously, that something is wrong. You might need to try a quick survey among trustees. Who's reading this report and who's reading it consistently? Also, you might ask on the survey, does it allow the board to make a decision? Does it allow for action to be taken? Does it show compliance? Does it enable communication to inform or engage, for example, your public or staff? So more on that. Under the banner of need versus want, we can also say that it's just, it's nice to know, or do you need to know it? So checking if it's legacy information, as I said, that 30 or 40-year report that someone's always been doing. Has it just always been done so people keep producing the report with its original intent, and that's long past? An easy test for this, or for any, is to ask the people who are actually reading it. That's what I was talking about at the beginning. It's a great question right from the start, and I actually did that with a board just recently, and it turned out that I believe of 7 people on their board, there was only 1 person reading it, and she really said, well, it was just that it was nice to know. But it took their administration probably a day and a half to compile all of that. So thinking about, best use of time. So if there's only 1 person that's reading it, then perhaps that person can be asked what they actually use it for, or if there's a less time-consuming way that staff can provide that information to that 1 person. Some people need that amount of information in order to feel comfortable in making a decision. If that 1 person needs to know it to feel comfortable, or just using it perhaps to explain something to their public, then maybe that's fine. But as I said, keeping in mind that the board is a whole, they make a decision as a whole, and they speak with 1 voice. So that staff time may be better spent responding just to that 1 person, on their own time and just verbally. Gathering information and reporting, it really takes time, and you may need to look at a cost-benefit ratio when it comes to that staff time. Is it meaningful? And I feel this checkpoint that I'm putting out here, 4 points, this is really the crux of aligning your monitoring reports with your policy and its goals. The report must actually answer to or align with the policy to show proof of progress. If, for example, you have a policy on safety and it asks for an annual review of an emergency response plan, which I used before, that's really compliance. The report should show what the review actually entailed. Who did it? When was it done, and to what extent? The board may actually speak to your division mission. Let's suppose your mission has something in there about caring and commitment to learning. In this case, you might refer to reports showing accomplishments in the area of student engagement, or participation in citizenship initiatives, or events in the community. It might be the uptake of a program that was designed to be inclusive. But if the report shows that there is little uptake, then there's your answer. When asking for a report, determine in advance in advance of the report actually being produced, the criteria that would actually show progress and that you feel would show progress. If the policy spells out directives related to the division's strategic plan and putting budget dollars towards initiatives in the plan, you might be looking for a report that includes progress on your SMART goals. And communication here is the key. If asking for information, make sure it's going to address your needs for compliance or address a decision or enable the board to move forward. The report may come from staff or a committee of the board, but wherever it comes from, the board needs to be very clear prior to asking what they are asking for and spell it out specifically. Exactly what you're looking for, what is acceptable data? How broad is a survey? When is it needed? When is the report needed? How complex is the report to be? And, it might say something like, I don't want to hear anecdotal information, or I do want to hear it. You're also going to be looking at what format you'll receive the report in. Is it a full 30-page report with graphs and everything, or is it a one-page summary and you want a recommendation included? Perhaps to what depth the information should go. How many sources do you want to look at? If you're doing a community survey, are you looking at a survey that includes staff and students and parents and the business community and affiliated organizations or other school divisions? It doesn't hurt either if you provide the big picture along with the request. So if you're saying to somebody, I need a report on this, and this is going to enable us to make a decision on that, if you include that in there, it really connects the dots for what policy the report will answer to. So when you're communicating that big picture, people that are developing the report, they can sometimes come forward with good ideas and good sources as well. It may include it may allow them to make changes to the report so that it stays relevant over perhaps a longer period of time. Now, let's remember that the monitoring we're talking about is at the board level. Reports you ask for should encompass the work of the board. And this is the same area, I guess, if you think about the nice to know versus we need to know it. Do you need to know the schools are safe and clean, or do you need to know, I don't know, that the janitor of school ABC has mopped all the bathrooms? That's a bit extreme, but you can think about what level the reports should be at. Monitoring and reporting that the board asks for should address the work of the board. The board mostly works at the level of policy and governance strategic direction. Of course, your administration may receive reports, that are procedural at their level or more operational in nature, but that can be left to them. And if you need to, you can have a summary if you really require something like that. If board level reports speak to board responsibilities, then you sometimes might want to look at who has the authority or the decision-making power that's connected to that report. Maybe that's a good measure. A lot of boards I've been working with lately, they speak very specifically. You might have a decision-making matrix in place or something that lays out whose authority it is to do what. And that can be a good test to say, is this report at the level that the board is actually working? Okay, and there's a couple more areas now. I've covered those four that I'd like to cover in doing a check for alignment. The first is not exactly a check on what you have, but rather what is missing. So if you start with that base that I said, you have the sound policies that are really looking to student learning and achievement, and you've taken a good look at all the reports that you have, and they are aligned with your policy now. But you should also take a look from the other side. Look at your policies to determine what areas need to be monitored to prove their intent, and then look for a way to monitor that. So, you've taken all of the policies and you found out that, or sorry, all of the reports and you found a connection there, but there's maybe parts of your policies that have nothing there to support them or that you will be able to report on and feel good about. Then you can go back to that and start from the beginning there. Do you need a report that is going to show compliance, or is it going to be progress? Laying out specifically what, what is acceptable data, how long it should be, what form it should take. Is it a need versus a want? How in depth are you looking at? If there are gaps in available data, you may also want to look beyond what is currently there. And of course, whether you have all the data that you even need to make a decision to move forward. So turning to your administration for some of that and asking them to, look at where you can get information that would be acceptable. And the usable report, I capitalized that because there's nothing more frustrating than looking through 30 or 40 pages and finding out it doesn't answer what you need, or everything is just buried in there and you can't do anything with it. So let's go through 3 last issues to make the most of using monitoring reports. Number 1, sometimes a report continues long past its usefulness, which is what I addressed earlier. And at times, people don't want to have a task really taken away from their job responsibilities. It maybe gives them a feeling of purpose, or they feel that it really defines a large part of their job. It gives a way to connect with board and trustees, so in a way it's a way to showcase their work, or perhaps if you come in with that, it's a way to bend someone's ear when you're on other issues, if you're reporting on that. Or it just may be that they like that part of their work as opposed to, and they like doing that as opposed to doing something else. They may feel that it's not providing, if they're not providing certain information, then they'll lose their position, or they just want to provide you with that information in a particular area that they view as a priority, even if the board doesn't. So I'm just saying that there are lots of reasons why you're coming up with reports that you may have to look at and say, is this really usable? So you have to think that things do change. It doesn't have to mean that a person isn't needed, but their job or the goals or the decisions that are being made have changed. So obviously coming from a board, assurance might be needed that even if the person doesn't produce the report, it will allow them to have free time to do other things that they're going to be asked to do. And it could be something that the board is really in need of. So they don't need that other report, but here's something that is going to be needed later and is going to be much more meaningful. It may mean that the board has to take more control, or management has to take control of their staff and say that we don't need this, but here's what else you can do. So just because someone wants to provide information as a way to connect or to showcase, or it's their own priority, doesn't make it necessary. Number 2 there, too much information. How much information is being provided? I've mentioned before an executive summary. Maybe that's all that's needed for some people. So of course all the data should be made available it can be made available at the same time for people that want to review it or perhaps delve deeper. But your board may want to, as a rule of thumb, request that a report beyond whatever X number of pages, beyond 6 pages, 10 pages, or whatever, it requires an executive summary, a 1-page executive summary. At the end of this webinar, there's going to be a couple of downloadable resources. And one of them is actually a template for an executive summary and the points that need to be covered within that summary. So if you feel that that would be useful, feel free to use it. I will just mention again too, and I said there's downloadable resources. There's that screen over at the left, or that square at the left. If you do have questions, feel free to throw them in there. We've got a couple more slides left. But here, number 3, presented in a meaningful way. Number 3 is really about whether the monitoring report allows you to easily ask a question on it, or whether it's presented in a way that makes it difficult to know where to even start looking. Or if you're going to base your decision on this, is it actually something that you can look at, or are all these charts and tables and everything understandable, and can you bring it up to the level where you have to make that decision if it's a yes or no? Is it reporting on areas that you didn't ask for, or is it just reams of duplicate information in the same document, or perhaps a repeat of the last report? Is it the focus perhaps is not where it should be? Good communication at the start can nip this in the bud a bit. So looking at some of those points that I brought up earlier, or the executive summary. All of these 3 points can also be dealt with when communicating what you're actually looking for in the first place. So being very clear whether you're asking a committee or staff to bring something forward on exactly what you want, and it'll just help them as well. So let's click over to this last part here. Get these points off the screen. So here's your checklist so that you can have a roadmap of where to start. And at the end, it'll also flip to a screen, as I said, with some downloadable resources that you can take and print off and use them when you're taking a look at your policies. Okay, so let's review quickly. Do you have a sound set of policies that lead to student learning and achievement? Do you feel good about those policies, and are they connected to your mandate or your vision and mission? Determining if each report is monitoring compliance or progress. That might be your first clue on whether it's even needed or not. What about the data that you're using? Is the data itself sound? Do you, as a board or as a manager, feel good about that data and it is defensible? Is the information, is it nice to know, or is it needed for a decision, for communication, for compliance with legislation, for reporting back to your community? Is it meaningful? Can you actually do something with that information? Or is it just information for your information? Is it related to the work of the board, or is it at another level? And you know what, perhaps a report starts out that it's, you know, maybe a little bit of at another level, and it might be 20 or 30 pages long. It might be easy enough to change that into a 1-pager or 2 pages, and the report is suitable for the level that you are working at. Is there a policy that you haven't actually measured? And that's a gap there. So going through and taking a look at each policy and saying, is this covered off and I'm feeling good about it? How usable is the report, or is it just an effort and frustration to go and look through that report to the point where you're not even looking at it anymore? So there you have it. There's your checklist in a nutshell. I'm going to flip over to this last part. So this is the end of the formal part of the webinar. If you have any last questions, I said you can just put them down there in a second. I'm going to flip over, though, at the same time to our last screen. I had mentioned a couple of downloadable pieces here or files, so you can take them off there. The first one is that template of an executive summary, and the second one just lays out many of the points that we've talked about just today. Plus, as I said, this is a recorded webinar. If you want to look at the recording, you can find it on our website. If you look at, it's the tabs at the top, and I think it's under Services and Trustee Education. It'll lead you to webinars, and our webinar library is in there. So, okay, I'm just looking for this here, and I do see that we have one question here. So it says, in the poll at the beginning, it talks about 3 models used in Manitoba. Can I comment a little on what these are? Okay, sure. So I think it said there the Nsba model, an E2G model, and policy governance. So just very quickly, the Nsba model, it was one that was developed in the US, and many divisions, they did implement that. It was quite a number of years ago, and some divisions, or a lot of divisions, are actually still using this model. It combines policies, procedures, regulations, exhibits, all in one document. If you're thinking of your own policies, you can quickly tell if you are using an Nsba model because of the way it's structured. It uses, I believe, it's lettered sections A through, say, M, and the policies you'll see are numbered. Things like AAB-R would be for a regulation, or DCGB or something like that. That's how you tell that it is an Nsba model. It's it can tend to be a much larger policy manual than the next two that I'll talk about. So the E2G one is really Manitoba specific. It takes, and actually some boards have referred to it as strategic governance. So it takes a lot of pieces both from the Nsba model, from policy governance, which I'll mention in a minute, and so there's a number of boards in Manitoba that have recently or are actually moving to start using this model. There's also boards in Alberta and Saskatchewan that I know they're also moving towards this model. Many that I can tell have been very happy with it. It lays out policies based more on governance and leadership, a governance and leadership role of the board, and it separates out related procedures. So the trend is definitely a move in this direction. The last one is policy governance, or some of you might be more familiar with it, that it's called the Carver model. There's only 2 boards in Manitoba that currently use this. And really it's due to legislation, taxation, communication in Manitoba for school boards that if a board tried to implement this, it would really be a hybrid of this model. You can't implement it in its true form. And it also requires a lot of hands-on work by administration to use it. And I've heard from trustees that do use it that it's a very steep learning curve to start using a policy governance model. So there's just 2 boards within Manitoba that use it, and they really have someone almost on staff that's very familiar with that model and can help guide trustees through that at all times. If you're interested, I have actually done presentations to a number of individual boards. I elaborate a lot more on different governance models, the pros and cons, what they entail, how they're used, why boards are making a change more to the E2G model. I've also overseen some initiatives for changing governance models if boards are looking to do that. So if your board is interested in that, it doesn't actually cost anything for me to come out and talk to your board just to hear more about it, or if you want me to walk you through some changes like that, that doesn't cost anything either, and you know how to find me. You can contact me at the association office. So I see I've had just one question on that. I'll pause just for a couple more minutes if there's anything else that you wanted to ask. You can also see that you can download theirs. I'll download those 2 files. I'll leave them up for a couple more minutes. But if that is all the questions, then that's the end of the webinar, the live webinar. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and you can also check out any of our other webinars under the e-learning section on our website, nbschoolboards.ca. It's under the trustee education section. Thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you.